Are you the sort of person who loves a high court drama with plenty of devious intriguing? Is learning about grisly murders one of your guilty pleasures? Do you get a thrill out of tracking the rise and fall of royal romances? What about plagues? Do you like plagues? If you are currently clutching your chest muttering, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, then A, sick, B, keep listening. We're about to take a deep dive into the life of Joanna of Naples. It's about to get really, really
real.
Joanna, or Giovanna, as she was and still is known in her mother tongue, was born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and heir to Kingdom of Naples, and Marie of Valois. Although she was Charles and Marie's fourth child, Joanna's three older siblings died before her. A member of the Angevin dynasty, Joanna was the great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Like Eleanor, her ambition and capability would threaten powerful men around her. Perhaps unsurprisingly, both queens found themselves having to run for their lives. Joanna was raised at the Neapolitan court by her grandfather, King Robert the Wise. Robert taught Joanna how to rule, but most of her care fell to a woman named Philippa the Catanian. Philippa was a wet nurse who became something akin to a foster mother to Joanna. A twist of fate landed her in the household of Robert the Wise's first wife, and Philippa used charm and beauty to rise the ranks. While the former laundress was elbowing her way through the medieval patriarchy, a young man named Raymond of Campigo was similarly rising in the king's favor. Raymond was Ethiopian and had been brought to Robert's father's court as a kitchen slave. He somehow managed to win his freedom and work his way up the position of head chef. From there, he was made a guard of the king's wardrobe. Eventually, he would become a close advisor of the king. Raymond and Philippa married and became incredibly wealthy. By the time Joanna was born, Philippa and Raymond were a powerful couple who, in just 3 short decades, had risen from poverty to become 2 of the most successful people in Naples. At the royal court in Naples, Joanna learned from her grandfather everything she needed to know to be a monarch. Robert the Wise was a good teacher. Naples was stable and prosperous under his rule, but Robert had decades-old Hungarian problem to worry about. For most of his childhood, Robert had not been his father's heir. That honor had gone to his older brother, Charles Martel. When Charles Martel died in 1295, his young son, Caribert, should have been next in line, but national security in Naples was a bit dicey at the time, and the king had decided to name his oldest surviving son heir instead of his grandson. But Caribert would inherit the crown of Hungary through his grandmother, Mary of Hungary. So everything was chill, right? Everything was not chill. After being passed over for the Neapolitan crown because of his youth and inexperience, King Caribert had, ironically enough, turned into one of Europe's strongest warriors. He also had heirs to spare, son Louis, Andrew, and Stephen, as well as several daughters, but he was still furious that he had been denied what he believed to be his birthright. In an attempt to resolve this problem and avoid a possible Hungarian invasion, Joanna was arranged to marry Caribert's son, Andrew, with the stipulation that Andrew's heirs would rule Naples, but he himself would only ever serve as Joanna's consort. Joanna would retain ultimate power through her lifetime, and her children would be Neapolitan enough to rule Naples. This last part was especially important. A big part of the reason people disliked Caribert and his sons was that in spite of their heritage, they were too foreign to rule Naples. The Neapolitans held a strong bias against the Hungarians, believing them to be rude, hairy barbarians. The idea of a Hungarian as on the throne appalled their fragile sensibilities. Joanna and Andrew were married in 1333 when she was 7 years old and he was 6. Robert drew up an illustrious guest list and organized an elaborate ceremony that involved an exchange of vows. The opulence of the event was as much a power move as it was to Joanna's ring. Robert hoped that his pricey display would demonstrate to Hungary, and any others who might be intriguing for the crown, just how much power he wielded. After the wedding, Andrew remained in Naples while his parents returned to Hungary. Before leaving, Caribert made sure his son had a well-appointed suite of rooms, a large Hungarian staff, and a good wine. Because God forbid a 6-year-old has bad wine. From Robert's perspective, keeping his new grandson-in-law around was a smart move. It gave Andrew the chance to learn the customs of the Neapolitan court and eased his tradition into his new role. From Joanna's perspective, it meant that she almost certainly came to view her husband, obnoxious younger sibling. Andrew also had a difficult time growing up in the court of Robert the Wise. He was isolated, lonely, and bombarded by anti-Hungarian sentiment. He lagged behind his wife when it came to social and emotional maturity. By the time he was 15 and Joanna was 16, they still hadn't consummated their marriage. Meanwhile, Joanna's cousin, the Taranto boys, had returned from Greece looking extremely dreamy. If Europe had been a suburban high school, the Tarantos would have been the quarterbacks and Andrew would have been that band geek with an awkwardly patchy beard. In 1343, Robert the Wise died. In a will written just 4 days before his death, he appointed a council to help Joanna rule until she was 25. 17-year-old Joanna, whose ability to govern was already considered doubtful because of her age and sex, came to the throne at an incredibly precarious time. And as for her husband, Andrew, drunk on power of toxic masculinity, and maybe in all that wine his staff were giving him, decided that he should be king. This was unsurprising considering that he had been raised on the idea that Naples was rightfully his. Now that Robert was gone, Andrew took advantage of what he and his family perceived as vacuum in power. Remarkably, Andrew was not satisfied. Even after Joanna became pregnant, potentially ensuring that one of Carabert's heirs would, in fact, someday wear the Neapolitan crown, Andrew refused to let up. He began making threats towards Joanna, who, in return, apparently taunted him mercilessly, and then proceeded to bully and insult everyone at court who wasn't a member of his personal household. He also freed the Pipponese, who had been imprisoned for terrorizing the country. To say that Andrew was unpopular in Naples would be a vast understatement. So unpopular that someone might even murder him. On September 18, 1345, after spending an evening of drinking and dancing with his fraternity brothers, Andrew returned to his room. His wife Joanna was already there, apparently fast asleep in bed. Andrew was just getting ready to join her when a servant came to the door telling him to come quickly to see a courier with important papers he needed to sign. Andrew hurried out, where he was seized by a group of armed men. They strung a rope around his neck and dragged him to a balcony where they dangled him over a railing. In the garden below, several men grabbed his ankles and pulled in an effort to speed up the process. While this was happening, Andrew's nurse, Isabella the Hungarian, stumbled on the scene. Her screams scattered the attackers and roused the royal household, but it was too late. Andrew was already dead. Joanna, 6 months pregnant and 19 years old, was a widow. She was also the prime suspect in her husband's murder. Certainly, there were some elements that made Joanna look less than innocent. Aside from having spent several years openly loathing her husband, there was also the somewhat damning fact that after Andrew had been lured from the rooms he had shared with Joanna, and someone had locked the door from the inside so he couldn't get back in. But there was nothing that conclusively tied her to the attack. Rumors began to swirl. Some described the queen as being unable to cry and refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Others said that she immediately fled the castle out of fear that her involvement might be discovered. Even more, she said she neglected Andrew's corpse for 3 days until a worker at a local cathedral took it on himself to bury the body. In reality, all of these things were untrue. There are dated letters with Joanna's seal on them that prove that she remained at the castle after Andrew's death, and historical record shows that he was interred the day after his murder. Less than 2 days after the murder, a man was arrested in connection with the crime. Prosecutors skipped an actual interrogation in favor of public torture that involved the removal of the prisoner's tongue. This created a problem because although it was clear that he hadn't acted alone, the violence inflicted on him meant he couldn't say any more names. Was this simply an oversight on the part of overenthusiastic torturers? Were they trying to protect someone by making sure that Tommaso couldn't identify any of his co-conspirators? It was rumored that Philippa of Catania and Raymond of Capago were somehow involved. Some thought that by having the suspect's tongue cut out, Joanna was ensuring not only her own safety, but the safety of two of her favorites. Shortly after, on December 25th, 1345, Joanna gave birth to a healthy son. By producing a male heir, Joanna could finally imagine the possibility of a stable nation. The queen, having a secured line of succession, was hoping to remarry. The man Joanna wanted to take as her second husband was none other than the hot blonde cousin, Louis of Taranto. But Joanna's remarriage so soon after Andrew's death wasn't a great look. And then a papal investigation into Andrew's death began, and another faction of Joanna's family began plotting against her. Robert and Charles of Durazzo saw the turmoil at the Neapolitan court as a chance to make their own grab at power. Claiming to be very concerned about finding justice for Andrew, conveniently an entire 6 months after his murder, the Durazzo brothers went to Naples to stir up some crap. They tried to turn popular opinion against the queen, which frankly wasn't that hard. As the population grew restless, Raymond of Campago issued a decree that forbade civilians from openly carrying weapons in public. On March 6, 1346, Raymond was ambushed while trying to enforce this decree and taken prisoner by the Durazzos. Having learning a thing or two, in the months prior, the Durazzo brothers immediately removed Raymond's tongue. They then had him publicly confess by nodding his head along to various statements, including the naming of his alleged co-conspirators. The people he listed off included his own wife, Philippa the Catanian. The mob, enraged by this 14th century predecessor of fake news, began to attack the castle shouting, "Death to the Queen!" and "Surrender the traitors!" Joanna eventually made the difficult decision to hand the accused over to the Durazzos, who, in turn, promised that the captives would be kept safe until the Chief Justice of the kingdom arrived to investigate. Meanwhile, in the east, two forces were preparing to invade Naples, the Hungarians and the Black Death. Only one of them would make people poop blood. Presumably, I don't know what kind of spooky crap Louis the Hungarian was capable of. But both would arrive in early 1348 and change the future of the Neapolitan crown forever. As Louis of Hungary conquered towns across the Italian countryside, the Neapolitans had to figure out what to do. The Durazzos, who had promised to set their differences with the queen aside and fight with their fellow Neapolitans, defected to the army camp. Joanna decided that the best course of action was to lose the battle in order to win the war. Pregnant with Louis's child, the queen fled her castle in the middle of the night with Avignon, the site of the papal court at the time. Louis of Taranto followed suit. On January 19, 1348, Charles of Durazzo and Robert of Taranto stayed and fought Louis of Hungary. But along with the Hungarian nobles, the Taranto brothers and the Durazzos were defeated and thrown in prison, while Charles of Durazzo was condemned to death, the same exact execution and spot where Andrew had been murdered. As Joanna was traveling towards Avignon, the Black Death was doing the same. There were so many dead bodies that cities didn't have enough room to bury them. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI, that's number 6, consecrated the Rhone River. Every day, hundreds of stinking corpses choked the river and slowly floated downstream to the open sea. This was the Avignon that Joanna entered, with great failure on March 15, 1348. This colorful parade was the first bright spot Avignon had seen in months, and people turned out to watch the young queen make her way through town. After being driven out of her own city and spending months fleeing the Hungarian forces, the adoration of the people of Avignon must have been a relief. But Joanna knew that at the end of that long walk, she would be tried in the papal court for the murder of her husband. If the Pope found her to be innocent, she would have a chance of retaking Naples. If she was found guilty, she faced certain death. Joanna asked for permission to speak on her own behalf, an extremely unusual request in papal den of men. She was the only woman in the room, full of dudes who were apparently not accustomed to taking anything women said seriously. Then, just over a month after Joanna's arrival in Avignon, Clement V issued a papal ruling legitimizing her marriage to Louis of Taranto. A few weeks later, he declared that Louis of Hungary should get the heck out of Naples. Louis of Hungary was just about ready to retreat anyway. Turned out that managing a kingdom whose population was both dying of the plague and also deeply hostile to their new overlords was more work than he wanted to put in, especially since he had his own affairs to handle back home. On June 30th, she gave birth to a daughter, Catherine. On August 1st, the queen, her husband, and their new baby boarded their fleet in Nice. Although some Hungarian forces remained in Naples, Joanna's army was able to defeat Louis of Hungary and take back her kingdom. The Neapolitans went yelling, "Death to the wench of a queen!" to welcoming her back with open arms. Weird. Joanna's life continued to be an endless series of obstacles and tragedies. Louis of Taranto, who had at first seemed so promising as a husband, turned out to be just as power-hungry as Andrew. He did his best to undermine her authority and impose his own rule over the kingdom. And then, in 1362, he died of the Black Death, or karma. We weren't really sure. After Louis's death, Joanna was finally able to rule her country as she saw fit. Naples flourished under her hand, well, as much as a nation decimated by plague could flourish. She couldn't upend the patriarchy single-handedly, but she did create a nation where women were able to succeed in ways that they couldn't elsewhere. But Joanna still had no heir, so she decided to marry again. This time she chose James IV of Majorca. The only catch was that James had recently spent 14 years as a prisoner in a small iron cage. This, to say the least, did not make for the healthiest of husbands. His combination of toxic masculinity and a decade of severe trauma had left him disturbed. Eventually, he left Naples to join Edward the Black Prince of England and Henry II of Castile in a war against the Kingdom of Aragon. Joanna was free again, but still without an heir. She found time to marry again, this time to Duke Otto of Brunswick. She far outranked him, so he was pretty happy to be bossed around by her. Everything seemed to be okay. Then the Pope died and crap went sideways. The last few popes had been French. When the Pope died, the Romans insisted that the next one should be Roman. In the spirit of compromise, the College of Cardinals elected a Neapolitan archbishop who took the name Urban VI. Since he had been plucked out of relative obscurity and elevated to the rank of pope by the grace of the cardinals, they assumed they would be able to control him. They were very wrong. Sensing the unrest in Naples, Louis of Hungary made his final power move. He turned Joanna's prospective heir, her cousin Charles, against her and financed his invasion of Naples. Charles sashayed his way across Italy, entered Naples, and took the queen prisoner. Joanna, who had fought for so long to keep her kingdom safe, was murdered by a treacherous cousin on July 27, 1382. Because the details of her death were kept secret, no one is sure exactly how she died. Some say she was strangled with a silken cord while praying, and others claim she was smothered between two feather mattresses. Because she was in a state of excommunication, she couldn't be buried in consecrated ground. Instead, her body was thrown in a well. It was a sad ending for a queen who had once been the most powerful woman in Europe. Joanna's life had never been easy, but she managed to hold on to and stabilize her country for nearly 4 decades, a feat that few kings can claim. She survived invasions, plagues, and 3 terrible husbands. Historians have been dissing her for the past 600 years or so. Her notorious reputation and alleged wenchness. Alleged wenchness are usually the first things they mention. But the truth is, she did pretty well with what she had. It's well past time that we recognize her tenacity and bravery. Long live the heckin' queen!